Just want to give another quick thank you to my friend over at Titan Comics, Will, for setting all of this up. You can check out Dan's work over at Titan Comics with the newly released Doctor Who trade paperback that released in the 18th of March, and as well as other books that Dan has worked on, including Cowboy Bebop. You can check them out. They are wonderful works. Just want to give another quick thank you to Will before we get this interview in.
You don't want to sort of fall into sort of Batman and Robin, Mr. Freeze territory. Hi, I'm Dan Weathers, and welcome to Dom of X.
Hello, everybody. I am Dom of X, comicreleases.com assistant editor, and today I am glad to talk about a returning guest over to the channel, and that is none other than Homesick Pilots co-creator, Nightwing ongoing writer, and Batman Dark Patterns writer, creator Dan Waters. Thank you so much for being back on. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me back, Dom.
Oh my gosh, how are you doing today? How's the last couple of months been as far as the work schedule and everything's been concerned?
Yeah, surviving. Been busy, which is always nice. Um, starting to ease up a little bit now, which is also nice.
That's good. Because yeah, I can't wait to talk about all of the books that you are currently and have written over. Man, we have a lot to get into. As many of you may know who are watching, or maybe some of you might not have noticed, Dan just finished his first arc on the DC All In relaunch initiative on Nightwing, which I have got to say one of my favorite books of the line. Absolutely spectacular stuff
Oh,
with
thank you.
you, Dexter Soy, and Veronica Gandini. Have just amazing stuff. And one of the things that I noticed immediately from the onset of the book is that you're playing a lot with the previous status quo that Tom Taylor has set up, but not only that, you're making it sort of your own and adding to it instead of saying, hey, like, brand new writer, brand new creative team, we want to make it as, maybe brand new, all of that stuff. But how have you managed not only to keep the status quo, but also say, like, we're gonna add on to the mythos of Nightwing and Dick Grayson when you jumped on?
Yeah, I mean, I think to my mind that's kind of the job. Like I was very aware that we were taking this over as issue 119 of the current run rather than it being an issue one. So I wanted to sort of yes and everything that had been done. And I was pretty confident that it would just intrinsically feel like something different and something new just because it's a different point of view, it's a different person, it's a different perspective, different artist. Um so I liked everything everything the team before had kind of like left us with a relatively clean slate, but a Bludhaven that was sort of chugging along quite happily. And so we got to go in and break it.
I love the mention and the part that you're saying, like, hey, we're gonna mash up some of the, because obviously, like, we are given a clean running off point with the Fallen Grayson arc, that the last story that Taylor and Redondo did. But I still love the fact that, like, you kept Haley the dog, which I think, cute character. Even the relationship with Barbara Gordon, who's now sort of taking on a more Oracle role. Like, I really do appreciate that. Yes, like, while it is a good jumping on point, for new readers to say, like, brand new creative team, it's still a lot of that same world that people are used to. And I think that's one of the strengths of your book.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're 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 writing in a lineage of 85 years of Dick Grayson comics. So I kind of like having all of that to pull on. Um, but I also think the stuff that's most recent is the stuff you treat the most sort of canonical and the most sort of. I think there has been a sort of tendency to sort of recreate uh, Nightwing and Bludhaven from the ground up when writers come in, and that means the identity of the city can sort of change uh, quite drastically from run to run. And I really want it to feel like a place with its own identity. So I think the way you do that is you try and pull all those versions together.
And make it your own, which is I think exactly what you guys are doing. And sort of on that note, you mentioned the 85 years that Dick Grayson has existed in fictional history and DC Comics and whatnot. Do you have any favorite Dick Grayson stories by any shot? As of Nightwing, Robin, even Batman?
I do really like the sort of era of Dick Grayson Batman. I think there's some just exceptionally strong stories that came out of that. Batman and Robin and Black Mirror, I think are fantastic. And I think the first arc of our book on with the show probably had the most kind of not quite nods to that, but sort of maybe drew on that a little more than the run before us did. And we also have, Francavilla coming in to do the next two issues, who did draw a big chunk of Black Mirror, and that was partly why he first sort of sprung to mind when we knew we wanted a fill-in artist for the next two issues to let Dex get ahead a bit. Um, so yeah, that's definitely stuff that's on my mind. But I love all of it. I love going back and like digging into Silver Age stories and the sort of New Teen Titans, like all of that stuff. I think is it's just like great having all that foundation to pull from and sort of take all this old wackiness and see how it fits in with see how that is the foundation of the character we have today.
For sure, because one of the coolest things and the strongest things I find with Dick Grayson's character in particular is that you can sort of mold him in whatever version that you want to, and it still makes sense with whatever story you're telling. Like Batman and Robin Year One by Mark Waid is one of my favorite books coming out right now, and he's sort of telling it from the viewpoint of Dick Grayson is still trying to figure out what he's supposed to be doing with Batman, but you also have, like you mentioned, all the Silver Age team up issues and Nightwing, even in the, mid 80s on New Teen Titans, or sort of him going up to that. Like there's been so many versions of Dick Grayson that I do think that if you want to tell whatever story it is, starting off from scratch, like that is one of the strengths of his character in writing it, I think.
I think my theory is that Dick Grayson is the bridge that allowed the DC universe to become a cohesive whole, because you had sort of two trains of hero comics, I guess, before that, where you had Batman rooted in the Shadow and the Phantom and noir stories, and you had so those were the kind of stories that were told with the character um, before Dick Grayson came along, and then separate to that, you had uh, Superman and Metropolis and all the sort of wonder and shock and awe of that side of things. And Dick Grayson sort of shows up a few years after Batman launches in bright red and green and yellow, and sort of allows those two worlds to at least visually and thematically start to merge, and that sort of gives you a whole dawn of new stories. Like Batman and Superman never crossed over until Dick Grayson was on the scene.
And Dick Grayson also learning a lot from those two superheroes, right? Where in the case of Batman, it's just sort of like this awkward father-son relationship, but Dick manages to, grow out from that. And on top of that, too, Superman being one of the biggest inspirations to Dick Grayson overall as a character, right? Like, I think that's really like the beauty of it is like not only just him learning as a character solo, but all of the connections to the greater DC universe is another one of the strengths of Dick Grayson, like you mentioned.
I think that's why a lot of his favorite stories, a lot of people's favorite stories of him tend to be the Titans adjacent stuff because that's exactly him, like forming that or sort of acting as that kind of bridge in a way that maybe Batman on the Justice League doesn't in the same way.
It's an interesting case in point, and that's actually something that I also found interesting with not only your book but also with John Layman on Titans, because you're sort of taking. I know that we have like the sort of cameo and flashback to the Titans in the first issue of your run, but also in the first issue of the Titans current run, Donna Troy is the brand new leader and whatnot. And I do find it interesting that you're taking him sort of, or seemingly off of that support group and putting him in more of a solo esque. I need to protect Bludhaven, make sure that everything is okay, instead of flip flopping between back and forth on the Titans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of by design in that we definitely wanted to start out with a small supporting cast and let it be very much a Nightwing story from the jump. And so that kind of informed the nature of the threat and having a sort of weapons company that's sort of geared towards destroying superpowered beings. And so having the Titans sort of zooming around would just inevitably lead to a sort of escalation. And I'm always sort of interested in when going to these universes to sort of telling a worm's eye kind of view, like what's it like to actually live there and be on the ground, rather than to just be sort of soaring above it all.
Because yeah, I have to say, like, one of the best things I think you did so far, at least for the first part of your run, is make it street level again. Make it so that we can see what the environment of Bludhaven is like. I think that's one of the things that often in superhero comics we don't get to see, because we do get to see the action of it all, right? The superhero punching the supervillain out and that way. But the world building that you have allowed like us to see with spheric solutions, and also the different gangs that are trying to get control over the sort of power vacuum, if you may, from the previous run over to yours. I think the street level of it all is one of the best parts in terms of you grounding the character again and also fleshing out Dick Grayson's world.
No, thank you. I mean, yeah, I think I'm just very interested in cities as a sort of theme. As yeah, I've been a city rat my whole life, sort of between London and New York. So big, big scary cities are where I've always sort of laid my head. So they tend to be quite at the forefront of where my head goes with these characters.
It is so cool to see not only just that, but also the different characters and the character designs that you're giving to the Fly Boys. Um, like, I have to ask, like, what went into the differences? Like, how, like, what went into you saying we're gonna have two, three, four separate gangs sort of try to fight over control? But not only that, like the behind the scenes of we have to make these characters look like the teddies, like with the teddy bears and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's it's comics, and you want things to be a bit big and bold and larger than life. But I think that with the sort of gangs of Bludhaven, I wanted to sort of separate out sort of the things gangs are known for into sort of distinct factions. So it all kind of stemmed from that, and having the Teddies be a bit sort of drive, a bit sort of Hotline Miami. Like that was the sort of stuff that was in my head there. Bit of Kira, um, and then the Flyboys being the sort of drug gang, but pushing that further because we're in the DCU, and the idea that rather than making more potent substances, they'd sort of lent towards making themselves more receptive by gene modding themselves. So to make themselves more their brains more receptive to whatever they're pumping into themselves. Uh, so yeah, bit of The Fly, a bit of just sort of nasty sci-fi in there.
It's the crazy part that you mentioned too. I love that you mentioned the Batman and Robin run that Grant Morrison and Frank Wiley did, because it's sort of where we get our first exposure to Professor Pig, and in that same case, I get a lot of those feelings of like it's gonna be a lot weirder when Dick Grayson is sort of in town versus Batman, and I do appreciate that like you like the fluidity and the creativeness of we're gonna have every single gang feel different from the other ones, because yes, like I understand like we're gonna focus on Dick Grayson, but it's also you don't want these to just be like one note off villains, right? Like I think that you're trying to get to sort of a more especially with the Teddies, just like getting to feel a little bit more for them because of the chaos of the police force and everything else that's going on in Bludhaven.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely started from a point of it's been sort of long and well established that the Bludhaven police are the most corrupt in the DCU. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I guess I was just reading around sort of gangs and gang cultures and uh, how they develop and why they develop and porousness between gangs and revolutionaries and the police as a sort of gang in themselves and just yeah, all kind of stuff that goes into the pot and sort of bubbles away.
And not only that too, but you're balancing multiple plot threads with a lot of different genres, right? You have sort of the detective of it all, where Dick Grayson is trying to figure out who, the new villain is, which we hopefully will get to uh, dive in deep in Foley's with the first arc. You have the underroots of every single one of these gangs trying to get control over Bludhaven. How do you manage to say like, I'm gonna focus on maybe this specific part of the story with one part where maybe it's like, oh, it's Dick Grayson uncovering another. How do you manage to balance all of that out in your scripts, if I may ask?
I mean, therein lies the challenge sometimes, but I think like these are all the elements that kind of goes back to again like Dick Grayson kind of being the bridge between the um the fantastic and the detective comic. Like all of that, it's all part of the DNA. It's all already sort of inherently there. So it's just about trying to make the dominoes fall in the right direction in the right places, really.
Which I can't wait to see as that continues to unfold. And one of the key instances of this whole entirety of it all is the brand new villain that you and Dexter Soy have created, who is Olivia Pierce, the CEO of Spheric Solutions. I want to get into the retcon a little bit later with the origin of her story, but how did you come about with saying sort of is she going to be the long casted villain for your entire run, sort of like how we saw with Heartless and Blockbuster and Taylor's run, or is it something where it was? How did the inspiration come about for all
No, I mean that'd be telling too much.
that?
We definitely we have origin her origin proper coming very soon in the book, and I think it's going to be quite different to what people expect it to be. The story of her and the Zanny, which is the entity that's sort of behind the scenes of it all. Um, and that's a part of the story that I've just written and I'm really quite pleased with. So yeah, it won't be too long before that all is all revealed.
I can't wait to see what you have going on there. And in this specific case too, one of the things that I love about Dick Grayson's personality is that he just sort of has like more charisma than Batman, where like you see Batman fighting, I think he's a lot more brutal and just like get to the case in point. Dick Grayson I find sort of to be the more he'll throw in a quip here and there, but he'll still get to the point. My question to you is, how often when you write, dialogue as Dick Grayson is fighting some of these guys, Um, when do you manage to throw like when do you say manage to throw in a quip when it's thematically appropriate? Because sometimes like I find it very hard, like in my mind anyways, when I see creators sometimes like you're trying to do like they're writing Spider-Man or somebody else, right? And it's like equip like every single other line. But my question to you is, how do you still manage to balance the voice of Dick Grayson with the charisma while still giving him the mental edge, if I may ask?
I think he's a character you can kind of just let speak. Once you sort of have his voice down. Um, yeah, I try not to overdo it with the quippiness, because I think that is easily done. And you don't want him to always be kind of the expected thing to say at the expected time. You don't want to sort of fall into sort of Batman and Robin, Mister Freeze territory. Nice to see you, sort of stuff. Um, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I quite like a fight scene to feel like a fight. So I'll generally try and let it breathe, and sometimes it's about going back and adding in a line here and there, where it seems appropriate.
Because there were two instances where I like chuckled out of my seat. The first one is in the last issue to the first arc, where he pretty much just said, "Hey," to the Zani, which you said, but we're gonna see more so later in the run. He said something along the lines of, "Hey man, you suck," like as he's getting his mind trampled upon. But also too, it's in the second issue where we get like a nice spread of him in a suit, and he does the tisk tisk, or the double T's that Grant Morrison I think very much made famous with Damian
Tut.
Wayne. I haven't like sometimes like I ask myself like, am I saying this like out loud in real life? But I thought like those two specific moments were you just doing a good job of giving him the needed quip or the levity in the situations that he's in.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think you definitely don't want to lose that side of the character. He can go kind of. I feel like we've seen him sort of push to the place where he goes quite dark, quite a lot of times, and you have to push him quite far to get him there. So I definitely didn't want to do that sort of joyless, him getting to that sort of joyless place, which I think we've seen it a few times now.
Yeah, I can remember when I read the Rick Grayson era sort of for Dick Grayson, and it just felt like there's a I mean, he's in there somewhere, but it's just trampled upon a lot of amnesia. Whereas we've one thing I've just loved, at least for like the last couple of years, is a proper return to form for the guy who's just trying to make sure that his city is okay. So I do appreciate you bringing sort of again like the levity in situations while still giving him a lot of butts to kick in the action.
Yeah, but I did an amnesia plot line in the first comic I ever did with Casper Wingard, Limbo, and I think as a writer you only really get one. You can only sort of get away with one.
Well, hey, it's I think in those cases too, right, where it's like I get amnesia plot points to say maybe if somebody doesn't know the character, hey, we get introduced to who they are, like they're trying to find out themselves, but you know I think less in case more to the point, like you can do a character introspection, I suppose, without needing to wipe away their memories or their livelihoods or whatnot. Um,
I mean, it's a soap opera plot point, and superhero comics. There is intrinsically an element of soap opera to it. It's part of the fun. Uh, but yeah, I think I've done mine.
all for in that. I also have to add the suit is super. Like the way you use the suit is super cool. Like when it lights up, I thought like in when I was reading, I think it was like Batman Three Jokers, where Batman uses his yellow oval that from the suit in Batman Ink, and it lighted up like a flashlight. I was like, why don't more suits? Why aren't more suits like that? Sometimes like I'll see comics where people, the superheroes pull out like a flashlight or they're trying to find something. I thought it was really cool for you to add that as just sort of a part of a suit. Like it never like it didn't click with me until I realized like maybe he can do that. Like I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, I mean that was like the first piece of art Dexter had done, which our editor Jess Burby sent me when she asked me if I wanted to take over the book. Had this, it was just this sort of he's posted it online since, but it's this just an image of Nightwing standing over the city, but with a white sky behind, and the V on the suit, the bird on the suit was just kind of a part of that white background, and I was like, that looks cool. So it kind of just bubbled out of that.
Cause yeah, it stuck, and not only that too. In the second issue, where we sort of see him fighting, these all of the robots that are supposed to target superheroes, right, with the spheric solutions, he uses his eskrima sticks, right, to sort of laser out. And again, like I didn't know that Dick Grayson. And like forgive me if I may have missed a Dick Grayson comic in the past. I've never seen anybody sort of do that in a Nightwing or what have you led comic book.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a guy raised by Batman. He's gonna love a gadget.
That's the fun, and also too, one thing I also like about the first arc is just sort of the relationship that he has with Oracle, but also I like that you're bringing a lot of the John Ostrander and Gail Simone Oracle sort of to vibe along with your book. And it's something that I've been enjoying a lot in Kelly Thompson's run over on Birds of Prey, and it seems like line wide. I mean, like what Tom Taylor is doing in Detective Comics as well. Um, do you have an affinity, if I may ask, for Barbara Gordon being Oracle?
I mean, yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's the Nightwing, the sort of very few that I'd read when I was like a kid. It wasn't easy in the UK, like where I was, to get um hold of sort of single issue comics and stuff. So Nightwing wasn't sort of on the shelves around me, but I found a few issues here and there, and they were mainly sort of uh like Devin Grayson issues from early in that run, and that's how Oracle was in those books, and so it's, I guess it's that sort of thing of that's what you first experience, that the kind of becomes a status quo in your head. But I always liked that he had her in his ear, and that she was there in this sort of support capacity, um, and able to sort of hack into anything and pull anything. It's a cool thing, and it also lets him have someone to talk to when he's sort of solo adventuring, rather than having to sort of fill the book up with sort of thought bubble captions.
Right. And not only the support from her too, but also the weird and odd other relationship that he has with his half sister, Melinda, who is currently the mayor, is running for re-election. Um, I find it interesting that you're again just building on the status quo of what came before, but also she is like super important as to Dick Grayson overall just being in the field and another person that he can trust on the sidelines because Lord knows he needs it
Yeah,
right
I mean,
now.
or can he? Um, yeah, I think that was a really interesting character that Tom Bruno brought in, and particularly sort of positioning her as the mayor, and sort of being very hard line. But I think part of my interest there is in the fact that Dick Grayson, Nightwing, wants to sort of he wants to help everyone. He wants to always do the right thing, but there's a certain he has a certain like amount of privilege is the right word, but he's extremely capable in himself, and he's also a master vigilante. So there's sort of he can sort of get involved, knock someone out, and then duck out. There's no sort of due process. There's no sort of um, backlash, repercussion that's going to immediately fall on his head. And so having these other characters who have to sort of do things by the book and have to uh, do things above board is an interesting kind of dichotomy.
And that's one of the things that I'm very interested and anticipating sort of in the next issues that follow, because they have a lot of there's been a lot of fallout with them, as we have seen in the first arc, because Nightwing is trying to ensure that the streets of Bludhaven are safe through fighting and detective work, while she is sort of doing it from the opposite side, right, where it's like she has to put in public policy to ensure that the city is safe, but she's also aligning herself with a character that Dick Grayson, most recently found out, like, hey, I am, I knew who, I might know who she is because he has like an inkling sort of from his past, but also he and Olivia's visions for the city of Bludhaven don't align at all. It doesn't feel like so.
Yeah, I mean the other character who I think is sort of interesting in this aspect is Maggie Sawyer, who in the next two issues, which Francavilla's joining us for, sort of takes a more central role. Who's the current commissioner of the BPD, and was a Superman sporting character, and then a cop in Gotham for like a very long time, through the sort of Gotham Central era, and is now so she's sort of gone from Metropolis to Gotham, now to Bludhaven, and all of that is kind of colored. You know, she's sort of seen every color of the DCU and its heroes and its vigilantes, and it's made her very capable and also brought a certain kind of like cynicism. So I'm really enjoying writing her, and she's definitely a key character to this story as well.
Because yeah, on that related note, Gotham Central is one of my favorite stories of all time. I mean, you want to talk about sort of the notion of like, oh, maybe Gotham can be like, you know, Batman helps or is supposed to help the police because he's out there fighting crimes, and then you find out, wait, hold on, that isn't necessarily the entirety of the case. But Maggie was always a favorite of mine from that series with Brubaker, Lark, and Rucka. So in this, and also the subsequent next two issues that you mentioned, Black Mirror artist Francesco Francavilla, who did a lot of the backups right in those issues, is a part of. Um, we also are seeing, at least on the cover of 126 and 125, maybe a partly new suit for Nightwing, and also a brand new character. Or maybe I'm hallucinating, like with Zanny.
Uh, I am not. Oh! I know who you're talking about. Yeah, yeah. All to be kind of revealed. Yeah, like the next two issues definitely dig into the BPD and its history a bit, and I think that's where that's all going to come into play. Um, and the arc we have following that is where you're going to see the new suit. That's something that Dexter's been sort of kicking around for a while, and I saw a sort of clear place for it in this next. It's a three issue arc that's going to follow the next two. Um, so yeah, it has a purpose. He'll be back in the finger stripes soon enough, I promise. But yeah, there's a method behind all the madness.
I can't wait to see it. And you also mentioned too, working with Francesco Francavilla. How has that process been like? How is it working with him, and send like scripting and working with him on the story process? And I mean, I can't imagine like how much of a blast that's because Francesco's one of my favorite Batman artists out there.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. I was so pleased that he agreed to come on board for these. Uh, you kind of have two options when it comes to having a guest artist come in, which is to either try and stylistically match it to the main artist on the run, or to sort of bank hard and go off in another direction. And I tend to prefer the latter because I think if you want to let every artist breathe, and you don't want to ask them to mimic each other. Um, but also you can just tell a different story with a different tone and build that into what you're doing. And that's definitely what we're doing here. So it's two issues. It's a an interlude, kind of. It's a sort of self-contained two-issue story. Um, and it's been a blast. Like every page that comes in is beautiful, and it's a different kind of storytelling to Dexter's. Um, yeah, I'm excited for people to see what we've done there.
I can't wait too. And the same case in point with is he coloring? He's coloring too, right?
Yes, yeah,
Oh man, because yeah, I just absolutely love his art. It seems like every single Batman page I've seen from him is like, I just wish he drew more Batman. And to see that like he's doing sort of the we're learning about the history of how the Bludhaven police force came to be and why they're as not so nice people as you think.
yeah.
What?
I mean, he was the first person as soon as uh, Jess told me that we wanted to bring in a guest artist to let Dex breathe and not kill himself drawing this book. Um, he was the first person who came to mind. He was the first person we asked, and we were over the moon that he said yes.
I mean I would be too. And one thing that I also like real quick and note, and the Nightwing story that you're writing, one of the gang members tells Dick Grayson that you're just another cop, you're just like them. And he's sort of like phased by it, and he like leaves him off to the police. And I thought like that was one of the most profound moments in the book because like we see him having a lot of empathy for the Teddies and giving them sort of a spot to hang out in after one of their own is brutally killed. Um, and Dick Grayson very much emotionally teared at that. But I love the strings that you're pulling through with moments like that where he sort of has to like do a double take and figure out like, okay, is like what I'm doing the right thing even.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always worth interrogating, right? Like, is putting on a mask and beating people with sticks always the best option? Um, perhaps, perhaps not.
But nonetheless, you all can get to your local comic shop, obviously, and read Nightwing up from issues 119 to 124. There is a trade paperback and standard size hardcover that are both coming out on the same day on the 1st of July. So head over to your local shop or wherever you purchase your books to enjoy the awesomeness that is Nightwing. And I would be phased if I didn't, if I left you hanging and didn't talk about one of my favorite books overall in this. I know that like Nightwing I enjoy, as like, hey, like I'm getting to see a part of the DC universe, but this was, oh my gosh, like absolutely insane to finally have been able to read the first issues. I'm pulling it like that in Nightwing, and it has been so much fun and so cool to see you like breaking up these into cases. And I have to say, like, amazing book before I get into the questions.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this has kind of been the book I've wanted to do since I started um, working with DC, which was all about way back in 2019 at this point, uh, to my own horror. Um, but yeah, this has been a sort of labor of love that our editor Ariana Tatura and I have been trying to make happen for a couple of years, and it's come together better than we ever could have hoped.
which is super awesome to hear. And one of the things that I also noticed in this book too, because you're writing a lot of different, interpersonal relationships with characters from, maybe different points in their life, and also tugging along with, completely different personalities. Like for example, the relationship that you are writing with Bruce and Jim Gordon here in this book very much so different than the relationship that Dick Grayson has with Melinda, or Dick Grayson and Barbara Havell, or Dick Grayson and Olivia. So my question to you is just sort of like, how do you, when you envision the sort of like, oh, we're only like a couple years into Bruce's Batmaning in Gotham, uh, how different is it for you to like sort of write that relationship with Gordon versus say maybe he's been out there 20 years in the field and he's had all of this history behind him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that stuff's all rooted in character, and character's 90% of the job. Um, it's looking at who he would have been, how he would have felt in this kind of era where he's sort of established himself, but is still this sort of young guy facing all the horrors of his city, and sort of running up against that every single night. And everyone's kind of no one's sleeping, everyone's frazzled, everyone's kind of trying to do the best they can, but it's a hard city to trust people in, and uh, uh, they're all sort of, I think, trying to be very pragmatic and get do whatever's best for the city. But yeah, a lot of frayed edges to their sort of tempers, and a lot of rough edges still to be sort of smoothed out.
And speaking of rough edges, I mean, you and Hayden have created one of the most brutally insane characters I think I've ever seen in a Batman comic, with the Wound Man, and all of the sticks and the needles and everything that you can think of that's sharp is just attached onto the character. So my question to you is, what in your mind sort of like came about to be this, we're going to create a brand new character for the first detective case and have it be this character who Bruce has to be a little bit more careful with?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always it's always cool if you can create a sort of foil for a character. And the Wound Man, the idea that he has all of these things stuck through his body which are very adjacent to major arteries and organs and things. So Batman can't hit him back without killing him. Felt like an idea that I hadn't necessarily seen done before. And if you're gonna create a rogue gallery character, you want it to be something that's unique and hopefully horrifying. There's a lot of horror in Batman's villains, so you want to sort of bring something to the table that can go toe to toe with that.
Yeah,
So yeah, Wind Man has been something has been sort of kicking around in the back of my head for a long time, because it's a fantastic sort of historical medical image that is quite surreal in itself. So just sort of taking that and transposing it to Gotham seemed like a cool way to open the book, and start it with a bit of a mission statement.
because I can't think of like, some of those, you know, Leonardo da Vinci or any texts that you see or sketches that you see from the Renaissance, right? Where it's like the most insane things that you can just think of, like, put onto paper, like some of the wildest imaginations out there, and you being able to like not only put that on page, but we also get to see like Bruce has, again, he has to be a lot more careful with him, and like you mentioned, just how do I make sure that like I don't accidentally kill the guy, because Bruce obviously has a line where he, in most points, right, wants to stay and keep it there, and the tension that is built up in the first two issues.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, yeah, that was definitely the goal. So, um, I'm glad people seem to have enjoyed it.
Also, take me through, if you can say anything about this. Like we have a different lettering too for the Wound Man, and where the text bubbles are sort of a lot more pointy around the circles and whatnot versus the regular dialogue that you might see from Alfred talking with Batman. So, is that the case in point of, I think it's Frank, I cannot say his last name for the life of me. Was that sort of his decision, or was that something that you said, like, maybe we could bring that over to see, oh, it's this person talking, we should feel a lot more afraid?
Yeah, I always kind of try and invite or suggest using specialized balloons and fonts for different characters. It's definitely something you can overdo, but I feel like a lot of the comics I loved as a teenager when I was starting to think about um wanting to write comics did that when I started paying attention to them. Sort of Journey into Mystery and Arkham Asylum and Sandman's an obvious one that uses a lot of specialized text and stuff. So I think I probably did put into the script a sort of note that it would be cool to do. Um, but the actual decision on it and what the final uh the final result on the page, yeah, that's definitely down to Frank.
Right, interesting. Yeah, just case in point, because sometimes, like, I know that some creators prefer, like, having, this font style over that. Like, it's like when I read a Tom Taylor comic, typically, like, for Nightwing and Titans, like, Wes Abbott's doing the lettering, and it's a lot of that same font style. So I figured, like, maybe creators sort of have, like, this template as for, like, this is what I want to sort of see, or versus, like, case in point, like, Wes Abbott's still, your letterer, right, on
Hmm.
Nightwing, and it's very much so a different font style than Taylor uses in his comics.
Yeah, we have specialized fonts for the Zani, and uh I I suggested using a sort of circus poster style font for our like title pages and things like that. So yeah, I mean it's all part of the whole, and the letter is definitely still part of the art team. So it's all stuff to play with, which is part of the joy of comics, really.
It definitely is, and one of the joys is getting to see. I mean, I'm looking at some of the spreads, that Hayden Sherman is drawing, and I'm just like, how on Mother Earth do they manage to make it so, like, you're immersed in the insanity of the situation that Batman's in, or even, like, if it's just maybe regular citizens talking in certain areas. Like, I can't I can't put into words, like, how freaking incredible it is to see all of the, like, some of the textless pages, some of the ones where there might be one or two SF, like, special effects or words or whatnot. Like, it's incredible.
I think Hayden's incapable of drawing a dull page, and um, also really loves doing all um, the cityscapes and the sort of intricacies of like the inside of the building. The second arc, being very much sort of confined to one space, but that space having a sort of MC Escher kind of vibe to it. Um, and it's something typically you wouldn't want to overdo in writing a book because you don't want to kill your artist and you don't want them to kill you. Um, but Hayden really, really loves it and will send me notes being like, "Oh, I'm glad you sort of put that in there and stuff." So really, it sort of lets me go buck wild with that kind of stuff, and I definitely want to give them the space to do those kind of images and really let the art breathe because it very much the star of this book.
Yeah, like, some of like the double spread pages, I'm looking at it and I'm like, it's me reading a Stuart Immonen page, or me looking at something like a J.H. Williams III landscape view. Like I'm reading Elegy, and it's like I'm getting a lot of the same tones, and it's just I can't put it into words like how they managed to do that. Working on Kelly's book over an Absolute Wonder Woman, like they are it's like I have to buy a Hayden Sherman book every day. Like it doesn't matter what it's on, like I have to get it.
Yeah. I mean, none of us quite know how they do it. We're just all very glad that they do.
Oh, for sure. And I have to also ask because the case number 2 on issue number 4 did recently spring up, and we have the introduction over to. Let me just say real quick, the fact like you're pulling in Scarface and maybe the ventriloquist and maybe a later issue. Like, how did you manage to put Scarface in like as part of like a building like that? I like the thought of that. It doesn't make sense in my mind, but when I look at it on the page, I'm like, this is spectacular. Like, how did that idea come about?
It's a tough question. I guess really there's always a sort of ambiguity with Scarface, which I really quite like, which is, is Scarface a an alternate personality of Wesker's, or is Scarface something far more sinister? And is it, for all intents and purposes, a haunted doll? And from a haunted doll, it's not too far a hop, skip, and jump to a haunted house. And Gotham isn't so packed with the sort of traditional Gothic manor, Wayne Manor excluded. Um, but sort of urban Gotham isn't too packed with those kind of houses. So a haunted tenement building felt like an interesting take on the subject matter.
And it's something that like I've never thought, because when I think of Scarface, like it's usually not like that. It's definitely like a lot more cartoony instead of the horror type of vibe that I'm sort of getting from you two. And it's like I'm just terrified by it. Like if I was living in that building and I knew that somebody was like that, like the first thing I think I would do is try to run away and maybe find a different place to stay in Gotham. But I like who knows? Like I've never seen this take on this character, and I think you guys have pulled it off well, and I can't wait to see issue 5 and 6 or whatever comes
Oh,
next.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's always a fun challenge, and I think it's a thing I lean into instinctively. That we've had so many characters that have kind of been created during different eras of this, the 90 odd years that Batman's been kicking around. And they've had very different sort of tones in that time, and been sort of reintroduced and reinvented in different ways. And my sort of background and interest and stuff tends to lead me to uh, sort of horror uh, quite quickly. So finding a genuinely unnerving take on some of these goofier or Silver Age characters and concepts is something I really enjoy doing.
Inspired by the Silver Age, I think it's a crazy time. Like a lot of people, I think they're sort of like sometimes tend to gloss over the Silver Age. Like they only like find one or two things particularly cool. But I do think like the cool thing with that era of DC is just that you can think of Batman in a rainbow costume, right? And it still somehow manages to work. And you have all of these characters that were created during that time, and putting a modern lens on it while applying your strengths as a creator, writer, whatever that might be. I think it's a positive to see like you not only doing that, but also with somebody like Scarface, who's not relatively like I think well known as a Joker or a Bane, um, or a Riddler or anyone like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think having the slightly less known characters tends to mean that there's more sort of latent content in them. There's more sort of takes that haven't been done yet. There's more, untrod ground. Um, and I think the Silver Age, it was a period of very sort of fecund and raw imagination and a sort of churn through of ideas and all kind. Nothing was off the table. Everything was kind of wild and then sort of moved on from very quickly. So there's a lot there to sort of go back to and treat as raw material and draw down into it and spend a little more time with it and why did this happen and how could this make sense in the context of the characters as they've sort of been molded into today. And I love doing stuff like that. I love what's at whatever's sort of under the surface of stories that uh you know maybe weren't meant entirely seriously and taken entirely seriously, but you can then later on look back at them. And I think there's a healthy tradition of that both in and out of comics. Like I remember being at university and having a really great lecturer who took us through the sort of psychosexual dimensions of H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines, which is just, it was an entirely boys' adventure book from the Victorian era and very sort of one of those things that was knocked out in a week by the writer, but because of that, he revealed possibly more of himself than he meant to because it was all just sort of bubbling up from just under the surface. So there's a lot of sort of yeah that stuff's my bread and butter. It's always interesting. It's always fun.
And that means that I don't know if I want to say that means that, but the possibilities for what you could do in the third and fourth cases. I will leave my mind open to imagination. If that's what you can make Scarface, if that's what you can do with the wounded man, what's next up in the alley for the rogues gallery that is as big as
Yeah.
Batman's?
Well, I think the solicitors number 7 have just dropped, which starts arc 3. And there's definitely a Red Hood mentioned in that
Mm-hmm.
solicit. So I think we can sort of say there's something adjacent to that coming. But I think it's hopefully in a way that people won't necessarily expect.
And if it is, you know what? I would just love at least Nightwing, maybe even Batman Dark Matter, whatever that might be. I would love to see your like more interactions with Dick Grayson and Jason Todd and even Tim Drake because I know that we have Damian. He has sort of his own book with Bruce over in Batman and Robin with Philip Kennedy Johnson, but I miss my other two Robins, or I guess three. Counting Stephanie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that there's been some people talking about dark patterns and saying it's sort of pre Dick Grayson. And I would point out that we've never actually said that. He's just not in. These are not the kind of cases that you bring a 10-year-old with you on.
If I was Dick Grayson, you know what? Because I mentioned Mark Waid's sort of book earlier. I can imagine Chris Somney's Dick Grayson who's like fresh out of the oven. He wants to be a superhero, and then the next thing you know, like you put that adolescent in a building that has Scarface in it with all the elements that you brought in. I can't imagine being a 10-year-old boy and walking in and saying, "Oh, I want to fight this. I'm excited to be a superhero."
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously sort of logistic things where different books have different tones, and Batman is sort of elastic enough to allow for all of it, and that's part of the joy of the character and definitely part of the longevity of the character. Um, but yeah, I think just even on a logistic level, these probably aren't the kind of things you would even Batman knows not to expose a kid to this kind of shit.
No, not at all. And on top of that too, like I'm thinking about like Scarface Tower. We saw the cover to issue 6 with Batman in the, or sorry, was it issue 5? One of them where it's yeah, issue 5 where it's Batman in the maze, and I'm sort of brought back to the Court of Owls issue, where Batman is, you're trying to figure out like, okay, like what on earth is this? Like, who are these people? And then you like sort of have to like flip the comic book over because you're stuck in the maze and it's making your mind break down. And I can only imagine the type of paneling that Hayden did, for that specific issue to make me feel crazy, whatever that might be or entail.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hayden's very much proven what they can do by this point already, and yes, this arc is definitely all sort of set in this labyrinthine building, and that was really gave me sort of the chance to just give them space to do what they do best.
Absolutely. And the sort of last question I have for Batman Dark Patterns. There is a specific line in issue number 2 where it says like how comics and TV have sort of misled people about knockout toxins, and Batman also uses a lot of toxins, like whether we know it or not, because sometimes like he throws smoke grenades and to sort of escape, flee from the scenes that he's in.
Shark repellent bat spray.
Exactly. And but also on top of that too, you do mention there's a lot of certain chemicals that Batman might or might not be using in this case, like chloroform, BZ, formaldehyde, and every single one of these other things where I'm like, I took 2 chemistry classes. I took one when I was a freshman in high school, and then I took one sort of like partly required because it was a GE requirement or whatever at the institution that I go to. And I just told myself, this is not for me. So, my question to you is, when you do research on a lot of those repellents that might or might not knock out one person, do you look up and say like, oh, is it something like you just know offhand you want to be able to use it, or something that you actually like take out your time and say like, oh, this is what this chemical does, or this is what this element does to your body, I'm going to use that in my book?
Yeah, I mean, I think the latter is has definitely become kind of an interest and a preoccupation, partly through doing this job and just partly because I kind of into gnarly stuff. Like I like reading sort of like forensics books and those kind of texts. Like I get a fair amount of use out of my sort of New Scientist subscription and stuff like that because I don't have a background in any of that stuff. I did literature at college and that kind of thing, but doesn't sort of stop you from going out and learning on your own. And I think as a writer, your job is to try and cast as wide a net as you can. And I always just kind of like taking, particularly with superheroes, taking things that and tropes and uh, concepts that we sort of take for granted and slowing them down a little bit and going, okay, well, how does this actually work and why would this work? And you don't want to get too lost in the weeds there. You don't want to have like, 6 issues of changing the Batmobile's tires and washing the blood and guts off the windscreen. But but I think there's a lot of drama and story to be mined out of things that can sort of increasingly be taken for granted because they're sort of expected and accepted tropes. Like knockout gases, or sort of, the sort of someone soaking a rag in chloroform and holding it over someone's nose for sort of 3 seconds. It's like that's not how that works. That's not a thing you can actually do. It takes a couple of minutes to knock someone out with chloroform, and generally it has to be inhaled in great quantities for that to happen. And it's very dangerous. You don't sort of wake up half an hour later in a uh, you know in a basement chained to a radiator. You're going to be sort of throwing up and in all sorts of bad ways. So yeah, I just quite enjoy doing that research, and some of it ends up sticking in my head, and sometimes it's a case of sort of going like, oh, I know that doesn't quite look like that, so let me dig deeper into it and what that would actually entail and how that would actually feel. And I think also with something like this is, it's detective stories, and I wanted to get a little deeper into the process there and the methods that are actually used, uh, so that um, sort of just intrinsically led to it becoming a little more grounded but heightened in perhaps and hopefully different ways than a reader might go into a Batman book expected.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I have probably like, swooped past the fact that Batman uses whatever, Nightwing uses whatever to throw something into a crowd of the people they're fighting, whoever that might be, and then seconds later it's like, oh, they're still okay, like everyone's still okay, and I'm in my mind like, shouldn't like at least one of these people be majorly affected? Like, does Bruce and Dick, do they know like what's in the gases that they're sometimes throwing out? No.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are accepted tropes for a reason. You wanna move your story along. You wanna a certain cause to have a certain effect. Um, if you get too deep into it, you start just sort of killing the fun.
Mm-hmm.
We have to accept that no one recognizes Dick Grayson when he puts a domino mask on, which covers roughly a tenth of his face. Uh, we just have to accept that and move on. But when you can mine drama from something like that, then why not?
For sure. And I just gotta say again, Dark Patterns and Nightwing are two of my favorite books that are coming out on the set. I finally got to finish reading Cowboy Bebop. Which very much reminded me a lot of the. I've only watched or most recently, I should say, the movie or the animated movie that
Mm.
came out back in the 90s. So I'm asking, like, were you a big fan of the anime going in?
Yeah, I wasn't a big anime person, like going like way back. It was actually something when I started writing fiction, taking it more serious, and I became friends with the sort of the white noise guys, the guys in my studio. Uh, Ron V sort of grabbed me by the lapels and sort of shook me and told me I was a fool for never having sat down and watched Cowboy Bebop properly. So I did it way back then, and absolutely understood what he was talking about because it's transcendently good storytelling. Um, Same with Samurai Shampoo.
Mm-hmm.
Like those two in particular are just they are the peak of the medium in my view. Um, so when I was asked if I wanted to write the comic, I was actually I'm very rarely apprehensive about taking on a property because fandom is something that shouldn't necessarily factor into your ability to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes you can do a better job by not going in being a sort of huge fan because you can look at something from the outside and find a different take on things that might be taken for granted if you've grown up with something. Like that Destro, the G.I. Joe book I did at Skybound, very much felt like that. That wasn't something I grew up with being British. Um, but it felt like something I was able to go into and see a lot of potential in, and had like a real blast working on. Uh, Cowboy Bebop, I was more apprehensive because I was such a fan of the anime, and because compared to most of the things I've worked on, particularly at DC or whatever, there are you know easily over thousands of Batman comics out there. By dint of that, they vary somewhat in quality. So even though when you get handed Batman, you're getting handed something with such legacy and such sort of uh, cultural standing, there's kind of less pressure to that to being handed than to being handed Cowboy Bebop, which when I started writing it, the live action show hadn't aired yet. So really, you're working off 24 episodes of an anime and a movie, which are all just absolutely top of their game kind of pieces of art. So I did have to sort of pause there and sort of think, is this something I have a story for? Is this something that I want to risk kind of screwing the pooch on? But inevitably, then I did sort of put my uh, love of the thing in a little box and put it on a shelf, and a story sort of uh, revealed itself that I knew I wanted to tell.
Because yeah, one of the things that gave me sort of like more runway to get into it was, I'm sort of familiar with the anime, but I haven't got I wouldn't call myself like the biggest Cowboy Bebop fan in the world. Like there are other franchises that I always find more joy than, like, no offense to Cowboy Bebop, but Batman I always gravitate to because I've grown up with that character since I was like 3 4 years old. One of the things that you mentioned, in the way that you talked about, does fandom affect you as a creator, and should it affect you before taking over a project? And I do find it, I think, somewhat more rewarding for, say, not even just like comics, but overall any medium, where maybe if you're a big fan of like this franchise, or maybe like your dream franchise, you like sort of like want to work your way up to it, instead of maybe saying like, oh, like the dream franchise has to be the one that I need to work on first before getting to it. And I find your perspective to be interesting, where it's like, you don't necessarily need to be embellished in whatever that character is, or that franchise is, in order to create something good out of it. It's actually something very similar that Ram V also told me when I interviewed him. So
Yeah, I mean, Ram and I sort of bonded over, I think, having similar approaches, and not that we don't like argue the toss in the pub, whenever we get the opportunity about this, that, or the other. But I think we have similar attitudes in that the sort of storytelling comes first, and these characters and franchises and whatever you want to call them, as long as it's not IP, uh, they should be vehicles for letting you explore ideas with characters. And generally, I'll gravitate towards something if it lets me explore something that I've become interested about in the world, either sort of scientifically or just culturally, historically. All those are the kind of things that I think let you access something in an interesting way, and sort of move the camera around, and do something that's recognizable but hopefully a little bit unexpected.
for sure. And in that case, when you actually like wrote the book, were any of the bounty hunters that you wrote in Cowboy Bebop, did you have a lot more fun writing one over the other, or maybe were surprised that you had as much fun in writing or scripting it?
Um, yeah, I think Jet kind of organically became not I was looking forward to writing all three of them, but Jet very organically became the heart of the thing. Um, when I probably assumed it would have been Spike.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and writing the sort of the end of that book with the sort of journey Jet's gone through and where he lands at the end of the book, which I'm trying to talk around without giving away. But when I first sent the outline in, it was sort of approved with the caveat of this might be a bit of a brutal ending for Jet. We're not quite sure if that totally fits the character, but it's going to come down to execution. Um, quite literally. Um, but when we got to the end of the book and I sent the script, there was no pushback because I think we put him through the ringer in a way that sort of led him organically to a place. So yeah, that was just a pleasure to write.
It's fascinating to hear, and also cool that you got to bond a little bit over Jet's character as the scripts moved along. So that's super nice to hear. And also too, for those who are wondering, the 15th Doctor Who trade paperback is also out. Which again, another series that I read. I think I mentioned in the last time that I talked to you. Sometimes the reason to why I pick up books is because a cover artist is usually on it, where I'm like, oh, I usually buy their covers, or that, I'm always interested in collecting them. So to see your name on it was a nice surprise. And as somebody who also doesn't know Doctor Who a lot, because I didn't grow up in England, it was a fun treat, I will say.
No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I did very much go out with Doctor Who. It was sort of the sci-fi franchise on my doorstep, I guess. And it's a vehicle to tell all kinds of stories. So yeah. Since they brought it back, I've watched it pretty religiously. It's one of those few, there's never too much of it comes out at once. So it's a sort of tradition I've kept up with since I was about 12 or 13.
So you
So
naturally
getting
grew up.
to yeah. I mean, they brought it back. I was about the right age for it when they did to let it get its hooks into me, and then going back and realizing how much of it, the sort of classic stuff, had been uh, Douglas Adams and that Tom Baker era, which then also lent quite hard into the Hammer horror sort of aesthetics and things, where a lot of the stories were sort of like, oh, we're telling a story about a killer mummy in a castle. It just happens to be on the planet Blorgon. Um, and I've always loved all of the 70s horror. So yeah, it all kind of just it was kind of well suited to me. So to get a chance to sort of put my stamp on it in the comics, um, I couldn't say no when that came up.
I hope we get another shot at it too, because it'd just be awesome for you to, I mean, that or Cowboy Bebop to go back and say like, hey, there's some more I could say. I know they're only 4 issue series each, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I say stay tuned.
stay tuned indeed, and stay tuned for also all of the amazing books that are coming out from Dan. And I want to thank him again for taking the time to just talk to me about the medium that we both love. And also a big shout out to our friend Will for helping set up this interview and the scheduling and everything else. I owe my hats off to you. And once again, thank you, Dan, for talking to me about Dick Grayson, Bruce Wayne, Faye Valentine, and Doctor Who. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Don. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. And I'm Dom of X. Once again, take care, everybody. Please stay safe and have a great one wherever you are.